He's the founder, chairman, and CEO of the Peebles Corporation. The Peebles Corporation is one of the country's few national privately held real estate investment and development companies with a multi-billion-dollar portfolio of projects in New York, DC, Philadelphia, Boston, Miami, and Miami Beach. Mr. Peebles will be interviewed by Chester Lee, partner and co-head of the real estate group at Donahue Morris. After our opening interview, we're going to follow up with panel discussions for the rest of the morning, and then we're going to break out for a networking lunch. Following lunch, we'll continue with smaller roundtable discussions, the closing panels, and then a networking reception at 4:15. Today's full attendee list is available at iGlobal Connect, where you can follow up and message with attendees after the event. If any of you need your login details to be resent, our team at the registration desk will be happy to help. We welcome all feedback, so please do not hesitate to contact myself or anyone else from the team. We wish you a productive day of networking, and without further ado, I would like to introduce our chairman for the day, Chester Lee. A couple of words on Chester. Chester is a partner and co-chair of Donahue Morris Real Estate Practice Group. He provides strategic and legal advice to clients in all types of commercial real estate transactions. Among other things, he has counseled clients acquiring, disposing, and developing real property, and has represented foreign investors in their initial acquisitions and developments of projects in the United States. Please welcome to the stage, Chester Lee.
I was going to introduce myself, but Anna did such a good job. And it reminds me this morning that Donahue Morris has been participating in this event for over half a decade. I say half a decade because it sounds longer than 5 years. But we participate in this event for many reasons. The first reason is that it tends to attract probably some of the most senior experienced executives in various sectors. And it is a very interactive meeting. Most of us in this room have been to other conferences which are massive, where people are in the hallway mostly and not in the room listening to the discussions. That's not the case here. There's obviously ample opportunities to network outside of the room during the breaks and lunch, but there is a substantive discussion that everyone participates in, and it's very interactive. You see on your agenda various roundtable events and fireside chats and an interview with Don as well. Those things tend to be a lot more personal and engaging, and that's one of the reasons we've participated in this event so long. At the end of the conference is sort of broken down into four main parts. The morning part is the interview and two panel discussions, followed by a network break. And then there's two more panels, and then lunch, and then there's two roundtables which people can choose which roundtable you want to sit at, and then there's one more panel, and then a fireside chat and concluding remarks. There's very little other logistics to worry about. Please keep your cell phones on vibrate. I always have to remind people. And so I'm about to have the privilege of interviewing Don Peebles. The agenda this year is a little bit different than the last 4 or 5 years that we've participated. In prior years, some of you, Sam reminds me that he's been at this before, I was asked to talk for 15 minutes about what's happening in the industry and what might happen in the next 12 months. I think after 4 or 5 years, I got it so squarely wrong in each case. They finally decided that it was time to get someone who really knew what he was talking about, and so they invited Don to speak, and so I feel privileged to be able to interview Don Peebles. So can we start that? Is this on? Yeah. So, can you hear me? Oh, so you can't tell that it was on.
I think everybody can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear the other one.
I have a mic.
But yeah, I want to introduce Don and maybe in a little bit different way than Anna did. I think an introduction is important to someone who's being interviewed, because I think when you hear a little bit about Don's background, not necessarily what his company does, but his background, you get a sense of the person he is. And the person that he is, particularly at a private real estate company like the People Corporation, has a profound effect on what the company does. And so understanding a little bit of the background of the individual is really relevant for understanding why the company does certain things and why it doesn't do certain things. So I'll do a 2-minute background introduction of Don. You founded the People Corporation in 1983, and you were a lad of 23 years old. I remember that year. That's when I founded my partnership. I got married that year, so long-running relationship and partnership as well. As said earlier, the People's Corporation is one of the largest privately owned real estate development management companies in the country. It's the only one owned by a diverse individual. It has properties all over the country, particularly in CBDs. Don was born in DC, moved to Detroit for a little bit when he was younger, went to school in New Jersey, might have even lived in South Orange, East Orange, for a bit. And he now lives in New York. Married 27 years, 2 children. Your oldest is in the business,
Yes.
In DC.
Yes.
Does your daughter want to be?
I'm not sure yet.
He's written 2 books, none of which are made into a movie yet, I don't think, and working on a 3rd. Don has also been a commentator on CNBC, CNN, Fox, so across the political spectrum. I used to just say Channel 7, Channel 4, now it gets really complicated. And so that's the background for Don. So let's start with the question. The interview is supposed to address the future of real estate investing in an upwardly mobile America. And I'm a good interviewer. I'll follow the script and ask that question. But I want to ask that question with a bit of a modification. I want to focus on the words upward and mobile. I think about upward, at least my interpretation is economic upwardness. There's very little doubt that since the end of the Great Recession, there's been a tremendous amount of wealth creation in the U.S. Some would argue in the current political environment that's caused greater stratification, but you can't deny that there's been tremendous wealth creation in the last 10 years or so. So I want to focus that as the upward definition. Mobile, I think about, you and I talked about mobility. The thing that we always think about is the millennial generation and their ability to be mobile for jobs, for living, etc. But I also think about mobility in a different way. With technology in the last 5 to 10 years, there's no need for many workers to be in one location at any one time. They are mobile, they can work almost anywhere. And so that sense of mobility, whether it's the millennials or workers, affects real estate profoundly. So how has the People's Corporation affected their development projects and their acquisition projects based upon this upward mobility in America?
Well, good question. I'll start with kind of an overview of kind of where I see the real estate market going and some of its challenges. I mean, the one thing that we just talked about, that Chris just mentioned, is that how real estate is, in the past, been pretty concentrated. So if you look at our industry and you look at where the concentration in terms of development, for example, or real estate assets, they tend to be concentrated. So if you do well at it, you build a business, and you do the next one, and the next one. And our industry is geared towards that concentration, risk mitigation. We want to go with someone with a track record, etc. So that leaves out much room for emerging entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs who want to get into real estate, who want to start their own business, want to get into development. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that this morning. Our industry is changing very rapidly. The way millennials and Generation Xers live is far different than the way I live or Chris lives in terms of just our everyday life and what we look for at our home. The symbols of wealth or the symbols of success for my generation one of the cornerstones of that symbolic visual success was a large home. So over the 70s and really started in the 1980s, as these mansions got built, we went back to these giant homes and these large properties, and so size indicated everything. Size indicated success, size indicated your position in life and how you've done in your career. And then, of course, that did the same thing in terms of where we did business and how we did business. And so we did business in an office. Our meetings were face-to-face. Our interaction with our customer base is face-to-face. So technology has changed all of it. So if you look at where we are in the office market, in office buildings, the way consumers consume office space today is very different, and tomorrow is going to be even more different because we can do business from all over the world with our phones. We can have video conferencing and anything else, so it liberates us to be able to do business from anywhere in the world. And so we can deploy our people, and people can deploy themselves where they need to be to do business. And so I think we're going to be much more mobile in that regard. In terms of home ownership, people don't want to be locked down to their homes anymore. And if you look at the headlines, the slowdown, I think the sales volume in New York for properties over $2 million is down 34%. The average sale price for a condo in New York today is about $1.6 million. 4 years ago, it was $2.5 million. So people who are looking in that, looking at that data are saying, we don't want to be stuck with our homes. Why buy? Why not rent and have more mobility? And so as you look at our industry, of course, the biggest growth in it has been, and its greatest area of strength has been multifamily renters, because they provide the optimum ability to relocate, to have flexibility and be mobile. And today, our generation shows the success of their lifestyle on Instagram or some other platform, but they now are into experiences, not sitting at home in their house. And so that has changed dramatically. So if you go out to the Hamptons, you can have your pick of houses that are 10,000 square feet or more, because nobody wants them anymore, because they don't want the headache and the maintenance of them. You can go across the river to New Jersey, go to Alpine, Saddle River, any one of the Jersey suburbs, and prices are going to be down 60%, 70% from where they were 4 or 5 years ago, because the world has changed. And I think that's kind of where, so if we look at mobility, it's dictating an entirely different product that the market has not provided yet.
Yeah, I think the multifamily spaces, it has been red hot in most places. It's cooled off in New York. It's still hot in a lot of the secondary cities. But an interesting part of multifamily we've seen is the workforce housing. That hasn't really been completely addressed yet. And I think some of that is going to happen. The housing stock in some of those places for workforce housing is quite old. So let's talk a little bit about something you talked about, which is those who want to get into the real estate business, the entrepreneurs, the new people. The People Corporation has not traditionally been a sponsor of funds, but you were telling me about an interesting fund that you're in the midst of, California, that is kind of interesting because it's unique. And tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why that fund is so unique in your mind.
So I've been in the business, in the real estate development business for 30 plus years. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there are very few newcomers. I mean, if you think about the active developers in New York or any given market, there'll be a couple of newcomers here and there, but by and large, they're kind of the same people. And that's because the development businesses requires capital, and it sucks capital out of it. So if you're successful, you're putting money back into the business, and you're doing it. I equate it to being able to go to Las Vegas and having a real hot streak, but you're strapped to the table. You cannot get out of the chair. They'll bring you drinks, they'll feed you there and so forth, but you got to keep your chips in. Every now and then, you can knock a couple chips off and stick it in your pocket, but by and large, all of it stays on the table. When you get up from the table, then you're done. You're out of the game. And that's kind of the real estate development business. And so people stay a very long time. It's one of the few generational businesses that actually survives because you don't have to actually rely on the competence of descendants. I mean, you think about that. I mean, in finance, in medicine, accounting, law. I mean, the kids or the grandkids actually have to be competent to be able to excel in that business. Our business, the real estate business, if one person is productive and you can hire out for property managers, asset managers, and the like. So one productive person leaves a legacy, and as long as they tie the hands of the next generation, there'll be some wealth left over, because this is an asset that appreciates over time. You can professionally manage it, and ultimately, it's a very simplistic business to begin with. So you don't have to have a specific skill set, just a little bit of common sense and some grit. But it's one of those few businesses that do allow that kind of generational wealth. So what happens is that makes it so it's a harder barrier to entry. And so over these past 3+ decades, I don't see many new players. I see very few women that come into the business. I see very few minorities that come into the business. And the reason why is not competence, not skill set, not even access to deals. It's access to capital. It is, where do you find the equity? Because to do a real estate deal, no matter what you're doing, you're going to need 25% to 30% equity. So if you're doing a modest $10 million development or investment, which there's very few of in New York City, you're still going to need $2.5 to $3 million. So no institutional player is going to make that investment. That's a friends and family type deal. Well, how many people have friends and family that want to lend them $3 million? Not a lot. And then if you scale it up to say it's a $30 million building, then you need to gather friends and family that lend you $9 or $10 million. So very challenging to do. That's why you see fewer developers get off the ground. You see very, very little diversity within the industry. And you see very few new first-time developers. So I've decided, at the urging of the treasurer of the state of California, who just took office in January, to put together an emerging developers fund. Our fund is going to focus on 8 major markets that our business already is operating in. We're going to focus on urban infill, and we're going to be actively looking for first-time, second-time developers. We're going to look to attract a large number of minority developers and women as well, but it will be for first and second-time developers or developers early in their careers who want to go scale up to the next level. And we're going to operate it more like a venture capital business, to where by focusing on the geographic markets that we're already in, our sponsors will be able to share some of our buying power. We will be providing guarantees for debt and for completion, and we will help them build their business and their infrastructure to position it for success. And we're out raising money. The first fund is going to look like it'll top off about $500 million. We're hopeful to be investing in the first quarter of 2020, and that should be one of many funds. I mean, I'm doing this more because, one, I think it's an untapped market. The funds that we do business with, PE funds that we do business with, their thresholds are generally, in terms of equity, $50 million at the lowest, but generally they want to see more than $100 million of equity deployed. So a small developer or real estate investor has very few places to go other than friends and family or family offices. And so we want to institutionalize the capital sourcing for small and mid-sized developers. And we think that, just think about it, we're looking at this to be the Walmart, per se, of private equity. We'll let everybody else focus on being Neiman Marcus and so on. I mean, you can think about it, they'd rather put $500 million in Hudson Yards, was related. They're going to get asset management fees, 2% on that $500 million, do very little work. Relate is a great company, so you can hand them the $500 million, and they're going to go ahead and do a good job and pay you back. And so it's kind of like a mindless investment, as opposed to taking some risk on some early developers. We believe that that's where we're going to generate more affordable housing. That's where we're going to rebuild communities without the byproduct of gentrification. I mean, I'm a big believer that communities ought to be redeveloped by the people who actually live in those communities. I think it'll create a much different environment, as opposed to these opportunity zones where wealthy investors are helicoptering into communities to rebuild them in exchange for some tax forgiveness or deferrals and a stepped up basis. But that's it, it's an investment tool, period. Development ought to be a business about passion too, not just numbers. It should be a commitment to wanting to make our society a better place. I mean, we're a capitalistic democracy. One of the pillars of our great nation is capitalism. And in order for our great nation to make its promise to everybody, then that means that access to opportunity has got to be provided on a level playing field equally, regardless of gender or race. Simple. But the market has failed to do that, and so something we're going to work with.
Let me pivot there, because that was one of my questions. The order was perfect timing, because by talking about that, you touched upon a topic that was later in my discussion, which is talking to you and reading about what your company does. There's a sense that there's actually a vision for People's Corporation, and that is not the case for many real estate development companies, certainly private ones. I think I would argue that in private companies you can have a vision because it tends to be controlled by a small group of individuals, but most private real estate companies don't, primarily because those who run those companies aren't fully aware of the consequences that their actions or inactions. They don't focus on it, they focus on other things. It's not that they can't, it's just not a focus. But that's not the sense that I get from you and the People Corporation. You talk a little bit about that. So give me a sense of what you think the vision of your company is and why that's important.
I mean, we as a company should be transformative. I mean, our goal is to transform our industry, to be a leader for change and progress. Most people, most entrepreneurs, including me, get into real estate to make money. I mean, I think that is a primary driver. We've got to make a living, we've got to support ourselves, support our families, and so that's our primary driver. But if you're reasonably successful in the space, you're going to get there. You're going to get there reasonably rapidly. And what happens after that? So I was early on in my development career, I decided that I wanted our business to be transformative. So not just what we build was important, but how we built it. Did we build our buildings to be inclusive? Were the economic benefits generated by our projects reflective of the communities that we were building them in? Were we re-engaging in the community? Were we doing things to make the communities better? And so as we went on, our company started focusing much more so on economic inclusiveness. And so as a company throughout our history, we've been able to do a little more than 25% of all of our contracts with minority and women entrepreneurs. And now we are committed to doing 35% of all of our business with minority and women entrepreneurs. I mean, now think about that. That's real. Females are a majority of our country's population. We're 53% of the population here in New York City. And yet they receive 2.2% of all venture capital dollars to support their businesses. God forbid if you're an African American woman, then you're only getting 0.3% of the venture capital dollars that are out here supporting entrepreneurs. Forget it, if you're a minority, then you're getting less than 2%. So basically, there's this wealth disparity in this country. There's a wealth disparity here, and it's creating a lot of friction. So people used to say, hey, you know, what do I care? I mean, I'm doing well, my company's doing well. What does it matter? I got my own, nobody gave me anything. So no handouts. I mean, I responded to somebody on Instagram the other day who said,
you on Instagram?
Yeah, and I got on Instagram on my 59th birthday. My son told me that I needed to kind of communicate in a more modern way. So there was this article in The Real Deal the other day about how the disparity of home ownership between African Americans and the rest of New York, there was a 22% spread between home ownership numbers. So there was somebody wrote on Instagram in a comment to that, and I never do this, I never comment. This person wrote saying, I came here from England with nothing, and you know, and I have a business and I'm fine, no handouts for anybody. So I felt compelled because I didn't see the correlation between this disparity and handouts. And so I thought I'd give him a history of America. And so he did, one of the most operative phrases in his comment was, he came to the U.S. from England. So he came here looking for a better life on his own, by the way. He said, hey, I'm gonna go to America, I can get my fortune here, this is a great country, greatest country in the world, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm coming here. More power to him. But he's coming to a country that my ancestors actually were kidnapped from their homeland, you know, 400 years ago. And they were dragged here in deplorable conditions and enslaved for 249 years. And that slave labor built the White House and so many other of our industries in this country. And then finally, when slavery ended, there was oppression and segregation and denied basic economic or educational rights for another 100 years. And now we're at a point where we are saying, okay, none of that exists anymore. We're kind of a fair society. We're kind of race neutral, if you will. But these disparities exist. And so why do they exist? An uninformed person could say, hey, African Americans are innately inferior. And of course, that would be absurd. It's systemic discrimination and the remnants of slavery. So think about it this way. You got the Indianapolis 500, and you got two Ferraris, and I mean, they are fast. They're equally as fast. And you got two drivers. You got driver number one. Driver number one is a great driver. Driver number two is an even better driver than driver number one. So, but driver number one gets in his Ferrari, and he starts on lap 400. Driver number two is right there at the starting line. And the judges and everybody else says, we got a fair race here, let's go. Who wins that race every time? I mean, the person in lap 400, unless the car blows up, is going to win every time. So what we're talking about when we talk about leveling the playing field is acknowledging the fact. And by the way, in driver number two, sitting on lap one, that could be a woman, and that could be a minority, especially an African American. And so that's not a fair system. And our industry rewards being first, doing it multiple times, because we reward track records. And so my view here is that our society will be a better place when we can make sure that we don't want to pull, I don't think we should take driver one and pull them back to lap one. I mean, I think we should take driver two and let's move them up to lap 400 as well. I mean, think about this. Women raise our children. Most of us were raised by our mothers. I mean, our society doesn't value that in the same way it values going in and sitting in front of a computer screen. I mean, that's an absurd imbalance. It'll value the person working on our car more than our mothers, our grandmothers, our wives working to raise our children. That's not a society that ultimately is sustainable, by the way. So we have to treat everybody the same and start everybody at the same place. So that's what we're going to try to do with our fund, and we're going to encourage others to do that, because that's how we're going to quiet down this disruption that we're having in the country right now.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. By the way, if we give driver number two a McLaren 720, I bet you we beat the guy.
I don't know, not at 400 laps. I mean, if you're starting off behind 400, I mean, it's real hard. I mean, look, they have to make the race longer.
Right.
And that's really where we're getting to. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, I mean, and I say it because I want to give people, you know, some sense of humor, but also some sense of relativity. I mean, you cannot expect someone or people who have been exposed to that kind of systemic injustice and that perpetuated for a very long time, and expect them all of a sudden to be able to compete with everybody else. And the challenge is that the millennials and Generation X don't think about it because they never saw any kind of overt racism in their lifetime. And our country and our schools have done a very poor job of that. And we have not acknowledged it as a country to where we're going to do something about it. Because letting the status quo be the same, it'll never change.
Yeah, no, at this point, I think the idea for most people is not having a discussion as opposed to having an open discussion, which is what we should be having.
Right.
Last question, just pivoting for a second. In the real estate world, our market tends to follow the general cycle about 3 to 6 to 9 months, except hospitality, which is immediate. Where do you see the real estate cycle headed? Are there places, sectors, and geographies you think are at risk, or are there, and conversely, are there sectors and geographies you think still have legs?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I was on Fox Mornings with Maria Bartiromo yesterday for 3 hours. I guest host that show once a month, and we're talking just about where we are as a country. So let's think about this. The country right now, unemployment is at 3.6%, so we're essentially at full employment. I mean, the biggest challenge that businesses are having right now is finding more people, especially in the manufacturing space. Manufacturing is slowing down to a degree, but there was a GM strike. There is a shortage of materials, and there is a shortage of workers to come in and fill this. Because of some of the immigration policies, we don't have our workforce expanding. So if you look at the economy's productivity, it is very productive, and the economy is in relatively good shape because these are temporary obstacles that are slowing down manufacturing to a degree. So then you look at a real estate market like New York City, and New York City overall was humming along, except the prices kept going up. You know, because land prices started running up, and cost of construction, cost of labor kept going up. And so that drove up, of course, prices. And so we got to a breaking point where people just could not afford to spend the kind of money. Also, if you look at New York, quality of life started diminishing. And you know, real estate's just like any other business, you've got to compete for your customer base. And then the state and local income tax deduction was taken away. So that took away any kind of softening of the blow, the high tax liability that New York was confronting. Then the state government, in their infinite wisdom, they imposed an increase in the transfer tax. So that made doing transactions even more expensive. Next session, they're going to impose a pied-à-terre tax. So it is the cost of living or doing business in New York City that is the biggest threat to it. So now you take New York, because by the way, 255 people per day are moving out of here. New York City's population is on the decline. It's only being level right now because of continued immigration. But New Yorkers are leaving. They're leaving for a better quality of life. So they're going to Florida first, Nevada, they're going to Texas, and they're going to Tennessee and Wyoming. And so these other markets that don't have these headwinds, California, similar issues, but it has nice weather, so it's a little better value proposition, say, than New York City in some regards, but their population is declining as well. So it is a shift now to where in markets like Charlotte, North Carolina, booming. Raleigh-Durham, booming. Nashville, Tennessee, booming. South Florida is getting another run now as well. So what's happening is that there's a shift of where people are going to live. And now the office market is soft already. And for commercial office in New York, it will get softer now that WeWork the tide has gone out on WeWork. And Warren Buffett said you never know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. Well, the tide's gone out on WeWork. They tried at 40 some odd billion, then they cut it in half, which I mean is unheard of in an IPO. OpenAI going to cut half the valuation, and now I mean they were 7+% of the New York City leasing market last year. They're the largest tenant in New York City, and it took them about 7 years to do that. That they usurped J.P. Morgan Chase, which it took them over a century to become the largest tenant in New York City. So I think office space in New York and in other markets around the country that we work as a major tenant in are softening and will soften. And I think we're going to see a change in how, and we're already seeing a change in how office space is consumed. Much more telecommuting, much more hoteling. Law firms are being much more efficient. So I think you're going to see change here. And then I think retail, I mean, I've said this for 3 or 4 years, I think retail is a dime business and it will only be viable for immediately consumed goods, experiences, and showcasing like Fifth Avenue. I mean, but other than that, I think we're in a lot of trouble in real estate. But the real estate market as a whole, nationally, and the markets that are not heavily taxed and that can compete for residents with quality of life and can compete with businesses with some reasonable policies. I mean, I left out the other thing. New York City is a horrible place to own a business as a business owner. Its business policies are regressive, and people are saying we've had enough. Technology has limited, has taken off the handcuffs, so that's why you see hedge funds moving out of here. And there's more to come. And lest these policies change, these other states who are smarter are going to attract businesses, and their real estate market is going to continue to grow. So I was on Fox. One of the guests yesterday was a guy who was up. He was up for Secretary of Labor and had to withdraw his nomination. He owned a fast food place called Carl's Jr. Well, he left California and lives in Nashville, Tennessee, solely for quality of life and taxes. And so I think that's a big threat to the markets here. And the rent control laws that just got changed, developers are looking elsewhere. Gary Barnett is going to be developing a series of developments in Park City, Utah, Ski Mountain. So
They just own something in Philadelphia. We all know that.
yes.
They never bought anything outside New York until 2 years ago.
Yeah, because I mean, people are looking. New York used to be the epicenter of the real estate market. It's changing, and I think we got to ask ourselves, by the way, when is a city too big? Is 8.5 million people enough? I mean, does that make it less unmanageable? Is that when the quality of life diminishes? Would the quality of life here be better with 6 million people? Who knows? I mean, but this is what's happening now is not working, and it's going to have further disruption going forward.
Great. Well, we ran over, but thank you, Don.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.